Good evening, everybody. Do you hear me?
Hi, teacher. Yes, hi.
Okay, good. How are you guys doing?
Good.
Everything okay?
Yes, a lot of work. We started, in my case, we started school last week, so it's hectic with the kids, getting everything organized, plus the university.
Mm-hmm. So you need to organize your time so you can do everything, right?
Yes, but sometimes you know how it is. Time is not enough.
Well,
Good evening, teacher.
hello, Diana.
Hello, teacher.
Hello, Luz. Okay, well, let's start. We're going to review the topics that you read last week. You read about groups, words that are used in social linguistics to study how people communicate and what is the relationship between those groups and the language that people use to communicate in those groups. And you had also an article, a research article about a study that took place in California at a school that is close to Mexico, and that studied the identities that people in that community have and the language that they use that support that identity, those identities. So we're going to start by reviewing the concept of groups. What's that regarding linguistics? What are groups?
Teacher, group, what I have here is in sociolinguistics is called speech community. A group depends on the purpose of if it's social, political, religious, and it must have at least two members.
All right, so yes, continue.
It's no limit, it can vary, and it depends on the purpose of the group.
Okay, good. Good evening, Jairo. Welcome to the encounter.
Teacher, good evening. How are you?
Good. Okay, so we are reviewing the concept of groups. Luz Helena just helped us with some ideas. She mentioned that people get in groups for different purposes, can be religious or for some interests that they have in common, and that they have at least two members, right? And she also mentioned the concept of speech community.
Okay.
So you all read four different concepts that have been created in social linguistics to try to study the relationship between groups, the language they use to communicate, and what they do. Those concepts are speech community, linguistic community, community of practice, and networks, social networks. So I mentioned the concepts in order of the oldest, from the oldest to the newest. And I would like you guys try to come up with the difference between those four concepts. So let's start with speech community. What was taken into consideration when that concept emerged in social linguistics? Or what is the definition that you found in the readings?
Well, in my group, we said it was a group who interact on a regular basis, and they recreate themselves, and their boundaries are sometimes absorbed and will change according to the situation. But they also belong to a community, and they're united amongst each other.
Okay, what you just mentioned, Leonardo, is the definition of a community of practice, right? So
Mm.
people gather on a regular basis. What they talk change, the same frequency of interaction changes, and well, interests vary. So this is a more recent, let's say, concept.
Teacher,
Yes,
I'm sorry, the question is speech community?
the thing is that we are trying to come up with the differences between the four concepts that had been created in social
Okay,
linguistics to study the relationship between groups, the language they use, and what they do. So,
all right.
community of practice, which is one of them and has been defined by Leonardo, is one of the most recent concepts. After that one, it came the concept of social networks. And before communities of practice, we had the concepts of linguistic communities and speech communities. So what about the other concepts? What's the definition that you found in the readings?
For speech community,
Okay, Jairo.
what we found was that yes, speech communities could be regarded as groups, but they had certain conditions. Number one, they had to have regular interaction, and some of these interactions were face to face. They also share some linguistic norms, I mean, some agreements in the way they use the language, but also social conditions. And there were five foundational conditions. They were regarded as they shared, they were part of a population and part of a population of an area. So those are the conditions: population, area, identification, interaction, and those conditions is what a speech community takes for it to be a speech community.
Okay, so but it was um, some of the characteristics that you mentioned were not taken into account when that concept appeared. Because, social linguistics and linguistics want like to describe what's going on in terms of the language that is used in groups and countries and the different varieties. So at the beginning, they just thought that in order to make the difference between languages, the speech community was going to be like people who spoke the same language and they use the same code, but they didn't go farther from that at that moment. So the first concept that was speech community only took into consideration the idea of having a common code to communicate. Then it came the second concept, which is linguistic community. What was added to that uh, concept regarding the first one?
Uh, I think they said that they were not only, they could be monolingual or bilingual. So it
Okay,
wasn't only using one code, and they could be found in small areas as well as in large areas, regions actually.
okay, good. So now they didn't take into consideration only one code, but they consider more than one code, and also the area could be a small one or a big one,
Mm-hmm.
right? Okay,
Teacher, I have a question.
yes,
Why is it code and not variety?
because a code refers to the system, to the idea that people can use not only, let's say in this case, Spanish, but also English or sign language to communicate. It's not, in this case, the idea is not making the difference between varieties, but between the system that is used to communicate. Those were like the first like concepts that emerged to try to make the difference and try to understand what was going on with the groups and the way they communicated. But later on, you saw that it's more complex, right?
Yes.
So
Because I read that the linguistic community is has a single language variety. So that's why I was wondering why you're talking about code.
okay, okay. Why I was talking about code and not a single language variety.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, but then you probably also, or if you check again, you might find that the difference between this concept and the previous one is actually in two aspects. One is the idea of using more than one language, and the second one is the frequency of use of that language.
Teacher, I could say linguistic community. Maybe I was thinking about in my office and the language center when we have the foreign volunteers. They came from Germany, from France, from Europe, different countries. And when they stay at the office, they started to talk in different languages with teachers from the language center. Could be a good example for that.
Well, what happens is that this concept is old. Yes, it was written in 1971. Nowadays, more aspects are taken into consideration if if a linguistic uh, wants to study what happens when people talk. So now we don't only take into account that the person uses one language or the other, or how often they use that language, but also how frequently they use it and what is the type of relationship with the person they talk to, and if they have more than one thing in common, so they are going to talk more frequently. If they have more than one like or than one interest. So in order to understand how people talk and the words they use, and what happens in those groups or between two people, or more than two, the more aspects are being considered. So this is an old concept, and the
Mhm.
newest is the one about social networks, which take into consideration what I just mentioned. What is the role of the people among the people? What are their likes, their interests, how often they talk? If they have more than one like, they are gonna talk about more than one topic, so their links are gonna be stronger, and the words that they are gonna use are gonna be the language is gonna be more informal, probably. They are gonna behave in a certain way that's gonna mean that their relationship is closer than with other people that who share less interest with the person. So we moved from talking about just the language people use to other aspects like interest, like frequency, and roles, and also codes, yes, but the other aspects too. So whenever you read nowadays like studies about language in communities, language in society, you will find this word, this concept in those in those actual, or sorry, in those current studies, while the other concepts are older and don't have into consideration what really happens or the complexities of people's interactions. You have questions so far?
No, teacher.
No, teacher.
No.
No. Okay. So we have in this slide, we see that social networks study interaction, the situations when people interact, how long people interact, how frequently, and the activities that bring people together. So we have here 5 aspects. Well, in the first concept, uh, linguistics only consider one. Here we have the concept of social identities. What's that about?
Good evening.
Hello, Diane.
Hello, sure. Evening. Evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Good evening. Well, for example, I involved in different social identities. For example, my family, my work, my classmates, and I think in each group we have different topics, different ways to communicate with my different partners.
Exactly. So those are social identities. So we can have different ones depending to the people we talk to.
Social interaction. Yeah.
Mhm. Yes, depending on the place where we are having the conversation and the role we have. So if you are talking to your son, you will talk in a different way than if you have the role of teacher, or if you have the role of a, let's say, coworker, or if you're talking to a friend. So I would like you to take a look at this um, cartoon, and based on it, try to explain what is the relationship between the identities and social groups and language. Identities, language, and social groups.
Let's see about language and social groups.
Well, I think the, the first one. Well, I think is when there are a group of, I don't know, the people maybe I know, for example, at university. If I interrupt, or I want to interact, maybe I don't to understand the special code that I don't know how to explain.
Yeah, like the words
Yeah,
they use to communicate.
yes, they are a social group, but if I want to join to that conversation, maybe I'm not going to understand because they have their special code. So
Okay.
I'm not going to understand. And maybe I have to suppose what are they talking about.
Okay, so let's suppose a conversation between two engineers, so about a topic of engineers, so that will be, if we don't know about that topic, that will be difficult to understand.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is an example of the relationship between language and a social group. And what about language, social group, and identities? And what the cartoon is trying to communicate. What identities can you identify in that story?
The ethnic
That
concept,
she's
perhaps?
the master
Sorry,
group.
Catalina, and then Luz.
Ethnic context?
Ethnic concepts
Context.
and ethnic context.
En contexto
No,
étnico, ¿no?
but no, I don't see anything related to ethnicity there. What is
But
sorry?
they were like with the pink. Isn't that like an ethnic context there?
But no, it's not the message of the cartoon because there is not a word that is related to ethnicity there. There is a
Oh,
word that
okay.
is being used to identify people as what, or to identify somebody as what.
Teacher, maybe some expression or special lexical forms.
So, for example,
For example, when the girl say the smartest girl, or when the other girl say the operation. In the case of she uses special lexical forms.
okay, exactly.
Relation to maths.
Right. So the girl is using the words smartest girl to identify the girl that is surrounded by a lot of kids, by a lot of children. And then the other girl uses the word groupies to refer to people that have the same interests as the other girl. But I mean, she says that she's using that word not not to agree with the black girl who says that they are friends. Yes, but she identifies that group of children as groupies, not friends of the smart girl. And the other one uses the word smart girl to identify the one that is good at maths. So this is an example of words that are being used to identify somebody. So if you remember, like in the first encounter that we had, we were trying to use different words to identify the the teacher that was in a video that you watch for 5 minutes. So we use language to do that, to say this person is this way or that way. And the people that is around us can agree or disagree uh, our ideas, also using the words to communicate that, to agree or disagree.
But teacher, that's assuming that they are understanding the word that we're saying, right?
Yeah. So also it also has to do with attitude, with nonverbal communication. So we could be sarcastic and we could use a word and mean the opposite. Um, so it also needs everything is not only to study the word in isolation, but also see what's going on in the whole situation. So the nonverbal communication that is taking place. So if anybody wants to carry out a study about social linguistics, it's necessary to videotape the situations to study that nonverbal part and the whole situation to understand what is really the meaning of the words that are being used. It might happen that the person that is listening to or that is having the conversation doesn't get the idea. It might happen. So don't get the meaning of the words because don't get the context, don't understand it, don't understand the other person's way to communicate. So in communication, there are a lot of misunderstandings because of that. One word for me might mean something different to other person, and that is related to previous experiences. So, uh, for example, words that can have a different weight or load for a person are the ones that are related to physical appearance. We say thin, chubby, uh, beautiful,
But
ugly, so bad, good. Those might be different for each one according to their previous experiences or likes. So that's why misunderstanding in communication might happen. Other examples of studies about social linguistics might be the way people that love soccer communicate the words they use, how they behave, why they do that. So you might have heard about studies that are trying to find out why some fans of soccer teams um, like to misbehave, what is going on there. So also they not only study behavior there, but also the words they use to communicate and everything, all the whole situation that is related to social linguistics. Comments or questions so far?
No, teacher, everything's clear.
no, teacher, everything's
No,
clear.
teacher.
Okay, so you read also an article that is more related to our job, and it was a study at a school in California, and it presented different ideologies regarding the use of foreign language. So we had ideologies of the school, the ideologies of the state of California, the ideologies of parents that took their children to the school, the ideologies of teachers, the ideologies of the teacher assistants, and and the ideologies of the students. So what were the results of that study?
In each of the items, teacher?
Could you repeat, please?
I mean, you mean conclusions? I mean, to answer each one of the items here?
Yes, you remember that the study wanted to find out or show that the school had a policy regarding
Yes.
studying the foreign language. but each one of the participants or different participants had different ideologies regarding the use of that
Right.
foreign language. What were those ideologies about?
As for school program, I mean for the school, they try to provide any type, I mean any language, the same status in such a way that students could feel free to use, let's call it English or Spanish, as they would they would feel more comfortable. Uh, the program also supports students to make choices about when to use what language, right? Because the way they explained was students would choose a particular language in a different situation. So that's what the program somehow fostered and promoted. That view of language was somehow shared by people interacting with the students. The interesting thing was that it wasn't only for students but also for grown-ups, like the freedom, the choice, an environment where languages had the same status, they had the same importance. However, the what the article also stated was that there seemed to be, it wasn't explicit, but there seemed to be an interest on the side of the parents for students to be using more English, actually English only policy, and that was aligned to the like current policies at Californian schools to use only English during the instruction. So somehow was there wasn't coherence between what the after school program wanted to do. That was mi casa mágica, mi casa mágica, I guess. I think it was mi casa mágica.
Mi clase.
Yes, mi clase mágica.
Mi clase mágica. Thank you so much. Within a context where, and what we wrote in task number 3 was, it would be understandable why parents, I mean, ideology at home would be for students to use English all the time. Because, I mean, if you're coming to a new country and you really need to, not only in school, but in society, to be able to communicate properly, maybe be successful, maybe get through school and university, well, a parent would expect their kids to pick up the language really soon. And most people would believe that for you to be able to pick up a language soon, the best way to do it is to use that language most of the time.
But sorry to
And
interrupt you. What you just mentioned is an ideology. The ideology that if a person wants to be successful, needs to practice the language and use it as much as possible. That's an ideology.
and that's somehow what I mean. It seems to be that the California schools are like they're implementing these English only policies. They actually gave examples on a couple of dialogues that students held, on how actually without the supervision or maybe the interaction of an adult, some kids would spontaneously correct or invite the other kids to use English, regardless that maybe the first language of the other student was Spanish and would naturally come out. There was a part of the article that called our attention a lot, and we discussed this, which at one given time and points they were talking about a kid whose first language was Spanish, and since he was a native speaker of the language of Spanish, he would easily get into groups that would use Spanish. By going to English only policy, somehow he had to walk away from that group. So actually, these policies not only had an impact on language proficiency, but it also had an impact on social developments, right?
Yeah,
That, that
but it's because of the decisions that people make when they decide what language to use in this case. Because as you mentioned, the school promoted the policy of using one or the other language,
Yes.
but the participants made the decision if they just wanted to use English or Spanish.
Especially because in the after-school program, in the Mi Clase Mágica, there's a phone
Yeah, I'm
ringing.
sorry, I'm going to.
The their actual ultimate goal was not language development, but cognitive development. And since it was cognitive development, they saw that regardless of the language, what the student needed to do was communicate, feeling comfortable, confident in the language, so that they could talk about content. Whereas at home and Californian schools, it seemed to be, I mean, the feeling that I got was that their main goal and interest was to promote language development. So they had two different interests. And because of the different interests, they made decisions on what the policy was. And those policies would actually help to put in place a certain ideology about the use of English. Just as it reminded me as some of the bilingual schools here in Colombia, especially in Bogota, the decisions that they make about having academic instructions only in English. And they have very strong policies as for code switching, and not only instruction, but the normal every day-to-day interaction, teachers talking to students only in English. It doesn't matter if it's at the cafeteria, maybe during the, I mean, recess time, maybe in the playgrounds, as a way to provide more exposure to the language, and thus students getting more fluent in shorter time.
That's an ideology, and that's a good example. Dario, you wanted to add something to the conversation, so please.
My point A is a language that
Sorry, I can't hear you so good.
It has
Uh, intermittent.
it's intermittent.
Bad connection.
We can understand, Dario, sorry. Could you please type your idea? Because probably the connection is too slow, the one that you're using, so we cannot get the idea. Could you please type?
It me I to the wife give me to mind this sponsor with
Dario.
Dario,
No.
I the problem.
No, Dario.
Okay, Dario, we'll wait. Well, while Dario comes back, anybody else wants to mention something about the ideologies that people in that community had?
Yes, teacher, me.
Yes, Catalina.
Teacher, I think it's not only in that community, but I think it's everywhere. A lot of kids depend on the ideas the parents have. So if, for example, at their home, they're not allowed to see TV in English, they're not gonna do it, even though it's very helpful for them. So I think, well, nowadays it's a little bit better, but still a lot of communities. And in the text, we could read a little bit about it, about the differences of opinions that the parents had of the kids belonging to a bilingual community. So they don't want the kids to lose like their native tongue, and perhaps they are afraid that if they get involved in English, they're gonna forget it, or perhaps their accent is gonna be different.
Right, and not only their accent, but also their behavior. I remember
Yes,
one teacher was trying to find out the connection between those only English policies at a school and an immersion school in Bogota, and the students' ideologies regarding uh, what they thought about Colombia and what they thought about USA and England, if they felt more identified with those countries or with our country because of the policy they had at the school, that they only had to speak in English. Any other comment about ideologies in that study? What you guys remember? What were the parents' ideologies? Because not all parents had the same ideologies about using English at school. And what happened with the tutors that helped students after school? They had some after school
they
help,
had volunteers.
the
Yes, they had
volunteers.
mother volunteers.
Yes, they had some volunteers. And what happened with those volunteers? What were their ideologies regarding language? Okay, Darío? No. And Catalina?
Yes, teacher.
Yes. Do you remember
Okay, so
those volunteers' ideologies?
yeah, but I think they were only they only speak Spanish to help the students understand it. I don't remember very well, but I know they try to get involved with the programs of the students and have like a confidence in them to feel more secure about the language.
Ah, okay, you are talking about the parents' volunteers.
Yes.
Okay, but remember that there were also some assistants that were American. So yes,
Ah,
the parents that volunteer at school, uh, they didn't have that English policy, only English policy at school. They talked about what happened at their homes in Mexico because the school was close to the border. And the American,
And the teachers, they believe that they had to adapt to the norms. Is that part?
yeah,
And that they should do whatever the country uh, was demanding for them to do.
so those tutors, um, when the students talked in Spanish, they answered in English. So
Mhm.
they didn't keep a communication in Spanish, or they encouraged the use of English at school. Okay, Darío?
Can you hear me
Yes,
better?
now the sound is okay.
Okay. In relation the first point, point A, the language ideology of the after schools, I wrote in the language ideology in MCM, the language is not the end in itself. It's considered as a powerful medium for socialization. Okay, it's important to build patterns of interaction. The language is not. It's a medium, only a medium, not the target, the main target. In the process of interaction, students are learning the language and have the opportunity to express in the language that they decide to speak. No, it's obligatory in English or Spanish. But I don't know. Well, the important thing is language is a medium, not a target, main target in the process of interaction between among students.
That is in the place where you work, right?
What?
The example that you gave us is in what context, in what place?
Okay.
Or is your opinion about how a language should be considered?
Yes, this is my opinion.
Is your opinion? Okay, good. So that's your ideology about the use of languages, let's say at a school. Yes. So
No, my personal opinion is based in the reading.
on the reading.
About,
okay, yeah.
yeah.
So yes, so that is you are
What
talking about.
I read.
Okay, I got it. So you talk about the first sentence that we have there. That's the school program ideology, right? So students,
Yes,
language
first
is a
point.
medium,
Okay.
and the
Yeah.
students need to choose the one that they decide. All right,
Yes.
good. And as Jairo mentioned, there was a mismatch between that ideology or that school policy and the teachers, parents, and students' ideology regarding the use of English at school. So some of them were told at home, some of the students were told at home that they had to use only English because that's the language they needed to get a good job. They had to use it as much as possible because they were going to have good opportunities if they were good at using the language. Other parents didn't care that much about that use of English, like the ones that were volunteering at school after classes. So they use Spanish with the students and among themselves, and they talked about their things happen during the day or in the morning at home in Mexico. And other people, other teachers, or the teachers at school also had ideologies regarding that English was the language of opportunities, while other teachers comply with the school policy, allow students to speak Spanish when they want it. So those, what you have, what you think, what I mean, your beliefs are connected with the language that you use and how you use it, and when you use it, and how often you use it. So that's the connection. Although there were some policies, the people made the decision, the people in that context made the decisions about the language they wanted to use, how often, when to use it, who they were going to use what language with, etc. Any other, let's say, example you might have about this? Some like anecdote regarding your experience teaching, or
Teacher, I can talk about my experience when I moved to the US with my kid. He was okay, so I put him in a normal school, and teachers there will ask me to talk in English with him to reinforce the language because he was new. So he was like, he knew some words, but obviously he didn't spoke very well. So in that school, they were pretending that I like talk every time with him in English and forget about the Spanish. So I had to change him from school because I didn't want him to lose like the maternal language, of course, because I didn't see like the point of me talking in English if he was in an environment where he speaks say English all the time.
uh-huh, yeah. So that's, thank you for that example. So that also demonstrates the ideology the school had and the one that you have. You think that you thought at the time that he needed to use both languages. That was important, and that I guess was rooted to your beliefs about his identity as a Colombian person, but who was living at a certain moment of his life in a different country. So I guess you didn't want him to lose that
Right,
identity.
right. I have seen a lot of kids losing their identity. Like they don't know how to speak the maternal language.
Or they don't know anything about their country where they were born.
The roots.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you. Any other experience anybody wants to share? Jairo?
I don't know if it applies, but how about the case of parents who are looking for a bilingual school and they pay? I mean, bilingual schools usually are more expensive than non-bilingual schools, right? And when a parent makes a registration for a student to go to attend a bilingual school, the expectation is for them to learn English, mathematics, and science, and maybe computer science in English. But as soon as their kids begin to show some difficulties in the content areas, parents claim that the reason why they're failing, I mean, if that's the case, is because of
because
English. So that their students should be tested, evaluated, and graded on the contents. I mean, if they are not doing well in mathematics because of English, they should be tested in Spanish. So I've always found that to be troublesome because, once again, the expectation is for students to go through a process that is bilingual. Parents agree for it to be bilingual, right? Actually, they are happy and they're paying for it. But every now and then they come to school saying, you know what? I mean, my kid, he knows math, he knows science, but the problem is the language. So you should let him go to Spanish. I mean, you should let him switch to Spanish and he should be tested in Spanish. And it's where I have found that there is this conflict between families and schools because, I mean, I think it's contradictory. I understand the points, but it's not easy for school to say, you know what, you're right. We're going to test him in Spanish, but this is still a bilingual school. So I don't know if it applies, but it's complicated. It's complex.
Yeah, that's a very good example because they're in that situation. Nobody's taking into consideration that the students' uh, likes. Yes, maybe he's not interested in using English. He doesn't want to. He doesn't feel attracted to that language. He's good and he can understand the information, but he doesn't want to use it. Although his her teachers use English all the time, he understands that he just doesn't want to use it. he doesn't get the point of why he needs to use it or doesn't like it. So it's part
So
also of the speaker's ideologies.
parents,
The child
parents,
doesn't want.
parents usually ask, what are you testing? The content-based knowledge or the language? And then school replies, well, we're actually testing both because yes, the mainstream for the mathematics class is English, and it should be a bilingual process. So I think there should be policies in place where, depending on very specific cases, students should be actually both both scenarios should be separated. Uh, to make sure students really get the contents at one given time and point, depending on the situation, it's not everybody, but some of the kids should be allowed to show performance and the comprehension, understanding of the subjects in their mother tongue. You know, I mean, just to check if they really understand the content. And then, on the other hand, well, they have to show proficiency in the language. But sometimes students do not or are not able, or as you said, are not willing to show performance and show comprehension in the content based through the second language.
Yeah, so in that case, parents should look for a school that has the policy that is being discussed in the study that you read. So, the immersion school that allows students to choose the language they want to talk, although they get to understand both, they have the choice to use one or the other. So I mean, in that case, parents should be careful about schools' policies regarding the use of language.
Teacher, but that's the problem. If you don't practice the language, you're not going to learn it. The only way you learn a language is practicing.
I also have the same ideology, but nobody can like uh,
Force you. But the
force.
problem is that you as a parent want the best for your kid.
Yes.
And you know, for example, English right now is the best thing that you can have for your kid. So you're looking for a bilingual school.
Yeah,
But I think it's more like an immersion problem or something like that. But it's what life is demanding, and you as a parent need to like explain your kid that's life, and make English like more fun, more interesting. If you allow kids to watch TV in English and music in English, it's gonna be a little bit less dramatic.
I get your point and I agree. But I can also understand people who are forced to study the language and they don't like it. And I think that if I were forced to study, for example, physics, because it's what is gonna give me a job in the future, or it's because that's what is happening let's say in the world, and it's the case in the case that physics would be like in the case of English nowadays, that is what is gonna give you more opportunities to get a job, like to do different things. And I just don't like physics. So I can understand those students who are forced and they don't get it because they just don't like it. And it reminds me a case of a student I had once at a university. I don't remember what he studied. I don't remember, it was business administration. But he had a clear idea what he wanted to do in the future regarding his further studies. And he told me, teacher, I have a plan. I want to go to Brazil. I want to study Portuguese. I want to do. He told me everything about his plan. And I understood that he had a clear idea what he wanted to do, and that he didn't see any point on studying English. Besides, he didn't like it, and he had a very good plan that that was related to the study of Portuguese and not English. So, as you mentioned, Catalina, parents can be uh, They are always like worried about their kids, their children's future, and they want the best for their children. But students or people or children also make decisions and have their own lives. Maybe by having by having like frequent conversations with them, like try to understand their points of view and having them listen to the adult's point of view, uh, like would be less problems regarding those students who are forced to study if they don't like it. They just don't feel okay with that.
I think it's going to happen with every subject in school and even in the university. And I don't know, I feel like it's not like the option to drop off school because you don't like science or because you don't like philosophy or something like that. It's just how you need to control it and how to handle it.
Yeah, what happens is that English policy is is a is a political um, rule. You know what is behind that
Yeah.
regarding relationship with USA and England. So that's why we have that policy in the 90s.
Mhm.
That's why, although the policy mentions that students should study a foreign language, most schools decided to choose, in most educational places decided to choose English as the language that was going to be encouraged. But behind that, there is a political reason uh, that is not uh, like easy to change, let's say.
Yeah, it's like now in the university, you are like demanded to have a second, even three languages to graduate.
Yeah, like I'm not against learning languages. I'm not, but I am for listening to students' likes and listening to what they have to say about what they want to study.
Yeah, but for example, that's the problem. That's always I had a question about it, and it's like, for example, in La Universidad La Sabana, if you don't know how to speak three languages, you do not graduate, even if you have done your 10th semester. So what then? You lose all those years of studying, and how can you like refuse to do that? You have no option. You have to do it, or otherwise you won't get your diploma.
But once you enter that university, you need to have in mind that that's the policy they have, and you cannot change it. So uh, if you are not able to learn the three languages or because you don't want, so you need to choose a different place to study. Each place has their own policies. So what we need to do is to, I would say, to choose the one that fits our needs and our wants. Do you guys have questions or more comments about the topic?
No, teacher.
No, teacher.
No, no.
No, teacher.
No, teacher.
All right. So the whole chapter that you read was about that. We reviewed all the information that you read. Um, so I think we can stop the encounter now. Um, this is the fourth week. It means that, yeah, this is the fourth week. It means that next week we will start the part of neuroscience and neuroeducation. This course is divided into 2 different topics, so that topic will be started next week. Neuroeducation and neuroscience.
Interesting.
Okay, so I appreciate the participation of all of you. That was really nice to listen to your ideas and comments.
Thank you,
And
teacher.
that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank you
teacher.
so much.
Thank you, teacher.
Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.
The rest of the week. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Bye
Bye,
bye.
teacher. See you later. Bye.
Okay.